Good evening. Even the most level-headed among us can be prone to the occasional superstition. We touch wood for luck. We step into a busy road rather than walk under a ladder. And we get that slightly uneasy feeling on Friday the 13th. All very mild compared to the story we tell tonight of the terrible curse which some believe lay in wait for over 3,000 years. Is it all fevered imagination? Or has it left too many tragic events in its wake to write off as coincidence?
Egypt is home to one of the Earth's most ancient civilizations. Surrounded by thousands of miles of desert sands, its lifeblood is the River Nile. The priceless treasures of King Tutankhamun. Filling his tomb and antechambers are objects of breathtaking beauty. The ancient Egyptians believed Tutankhamun would take them with him to the next world. But when they left these artifacts behind, did they also leave something darker, something which would strike at those who dared to disturb what rightfully belonged to their king? It is 1922. And for more than 30 centuries, no one has set foot into this secret place hidden below the sun-baked, inhospitable desert in the Valley of the Kings. But the sands of time are running out. Thousands of miles away in Hampshire is Highclere Castle, family seat of the 5th Earl of Carnarvon. His meeting with Egyptologist Howard Carter will quite simply make history.
£1,000 and we don't have anything to show for it.
But, my lord, the tomb is there. And now we know where we should be concentrating our excavations. My lord, I believe the area will prove most fruitful.
But one cannot go on searching forever. I cannot fund some impossible gamble.
But, my lord, think of the prize. And think how you would feel should it be another who makes the discovery which you now most surely have earned. If you would permit Mr. Bethel to show you the search area more precisely.
The Valley of the Kings.
Yes, my lord. The East Valley.
Very well, Carter, you have one more chance.
My grandfather didn't suffer fools gladly. He was interested always in archaeology in this country. I think it was finding bits and pieces of funeral artifacts from Tutankhamun's grandfather that encouraged Carter to advise my grandfather that there were still one place which had never been dug at all.
So in October, November 1922, they agree to have one final go at it. If it doesn't work this time, we'll never look again. The rest is history.
I can only guess, but I imagine my grandfather was very excited when he received the telegram.
From Carter.
At last have made wonderful discovery in Valley. A magnificent tomb with seals intact. Recovered same for your arrival. Congratulations, Howard Carter.
We found it.
It was the most important find in the history of archaeology, in my view. The most complete pharaonic tomb that had ever been discovered. A bit like the moonshot, you know, in the 1960s. It had that sort of media attention. Carnarvon, in common with a lot of the aristocracy in the 1920s, who'd come out of the First World War, was very interested in spiritualism and in the occult. Upstairs in the East Anglia bedroom, there were said to be sort of seances and table rapping and that sort of stuff.
It was here, during a séance, that Lord Carnarvon was warned that should he go into the tomb, he would be in grave danger. There was another supposed warning to Lord Carnarvon and the rest of the expedition when a famous novelist of the time, Marie Corelli, wrote to the Times in March 1923, claiming that the most dire punishment follows any rash intruder into a sealed tomb.
Finish! But whatever the danger, no one would jib at this adventure. And what an adventure! A challenge to the psychic powers of the ages.
Lord Carnarvon's 20-year-long quest finally ended on February the 17th, 1923, when he and Carter found themselves at the entrance to the burial chamber itself.
This is what we've been working for. If he goes down in that spirit, I'll give him 6 weeks to live.
Arthur Weigel was an ex-Egyptologist employed by the Daily Mail. So he started producing various stories, amongst which the story that Carnarvon went into the tomb with a broad grin on his face, and Weigel said, if he has that attitude, I doubt whether he'll last 6 weeks.
This is what we've been working for. Yes, yes, yes! Come on. Huh? Can you see anything? Wonderful things.
And when they realised the seals weren't broken,
Wonderful things.
the doors of the shrine were sealed with Tut's seal, that was the moment they knew there was something inside. Carnarvon must have been fantastically excited, almost blew a fuse.
Oh, my Lord.
When the news of the dig reached the papers, and it was the first peacetime mass media event of the 20th century, someone wrote to the papers and said that when Carter first found the tomb, there was a curse in hieroglyphics. Fabulous stuff.
Death comes on swift wings to he who disturbs the Pharaoh's rest.
There's no doubt there was a curse on nearly all the pharaohs' tombs. As far as this particular tomb was concerned, it would have been the same.
Carter had a pet canary in the Valley of the Kings, and the day the tomb was opened, a cobra got into his house and somehow managed to get into the cage, and the poor canary was eaten.
After the opening of the burial chamber, Carnarvon suffered a mosquito bite, which at the time seemed nothing more than a minor irritation.
It was said by some that Carnarvon was bitten on the left cheek at the exact spot where there's an indentation on the cheek of the boy king Tut.
Lord Carnarvon thought nothing more of the bite until some days later.
At some stage, my grandfather, he cut himself shaving, cut the mosquito bite, and it became infected, and he got septicemia.
And his temperature starts going up. It's about 102, 104 by this stage. He's getting feverish.
My father heard of my grandfather being very unwell as a soldier in India in the 7th Hussars, and he got permission to travel as fast as possible.
Do you remember how those Italians ran like rabbits in Piave?
Oh, yes, dear Papa, they did. They did.
We should have shelled them and shot them like rabbits.
Yes, I'm sure you're right.
And immediately, of course, all hell breaks loose. Various things happen simultaneously.
The strangest thing of the lot was the lights going out in Cairo at the time my grandfather died. There was no answer to it, and therefore it's still a mystery, unsolved. My grandfather, Jack Russell, which he'd taken with him on all his other visits, and this time he'd left here at Highclere. At the same time, allowing for time change, let out a howl in the housekeeper's room and died.
Was it King Tutankhamun announcing his revenge? I think the incident with the dog is suggestive, because, of course, the Egyptians worshipped a god in the form of a dog, Anubis, the jackal god, and Anubis was a god of embalming, and he was also a god that guarded the corpse. There's a magnificent statue of Anubis that was found in the tomb. Isn't it a strange coincidence that a dog dies at the same time as Lord Carnarvon, when there's a dog in the tomb of Tutankhamun keeping guard.
Lord Carnarvon was laid to rest here at Beacon Hill, overlooking his beloved Highclere Castle, and his Jack Russell Terrier was buried with him. The 5th Earl's son never went into the tomb and was reported as saying that he would not accept £1 million to do so. The current Lord Carnarvon has also stayed well away, despite several invitations.
If the evil curse really exists, surely there'd be more victims. After all, Lord Carnarvon wasn't the only person responsible for raiding King Tutankhamun's treasury. The discovery of King Tutankhamun's tomb was the most significant find in archaeological history. But there were those who believed that an ancient curse would strike at those responsible for raiding its treasures.
After the death of Lord Carnarvon, worldwide attention focused on the curse. Even the normally restrained Times blamed the ancient Egyptian god of death, Osiris. Meanwhile, it seemed more victims were being claimed.
There was a young man by the name of Richard Bethel. Now, he was a protege of Carnarvon's. He was secretary to the expedition, worked very closely with Carter. He was the son of Lord Westbury. Many of the artefacts from this tomb and others ended up in his house. Now, his house was the scene of unexplained bangs, fires were started. A family servant later says that he started the fires because he was freaked out by the atmosphere.
In November 1929, Richard Bethel, apparently a fit and healthy 46-year-old, was relaxing at his London club when he had a sudden seizure.
Bethel himself is found dead in a chair in a club for no apparent reason. Lord Westbury was very upset by his son's death, obviously, and he attributed it to the curse. He committed suicide, he wasn't killed by a mummy, but something got to him very badly, and we just don't know quite how.
Lord Westbury jumped to his death.
On the way to Lord Westbury's funeral, the hearse runs over a small boy who is also killed. He had nothing to do with the expedition, but he was linked to it by this chain of causality and this chain of tragedy.
If the curse really existed, wouldn't it also have hit Howard Carter? After all, he'd actually discovered the tomb. He, in fact, lived on for many healthy and happy years and died a natural death.
Now, of course, one of the main things that the skeptics always say when you bring up the subject of the curse is, oh, well, Carter was in charge of the expedition. He lived until 1939 for another 16 years. But I don't think he came off scot-free. He did not have the sort of career of success and professional esteem that you would expect from someone who had made the greatest archaeological discovery of the 20th century. Very few people turned up to his funeral. He was buried in a very small grave. Just because a dog doesn't bite everybody, it doesn't say it doesn't bite somebody. One coincidence, fine. Two coincidences, fine. But what we have in this case is a whole group of different sets of coincidences that all seem to cluster around this one tomb and this one excavation. And then, of course, Lord Carnarvon's family was struck by a tragedy as well. His half-brother, Aubrey, died in a fit of insanity. His half-sister was bitten, rather coincidentally, by an insect, and that became infected, and she died. And then there was Lady Carnarvon, Almina, who was a Rothschild's heiress, a rich woman, you would think. But she dies penniless in a bedsitter.
Numerous film and television companies have made dramas and documentaries about King Tutankhamun. Almost all have been riddled with disaster.
If somebody offered me £1 million, I would not go back to Egypt ever again. There was too many things going wrong, and it was really freaky. Everything went wrong.
Trevor Smith trains animals for film productions around the world, including a drama shot this year set around the Tutankhamun story.
Everything went wrong it possibly could do. We had to take some Saker falcons and fly them in the desert. And even on the day, they took 3 days finding the location. And on the day, my man went violently sick, so we couldn't film there. When we eventually did find a location, terrific sandstorms blew up and we couldn't film. So at the end of the day, it was just a total nightmare.
Even Professor Christopher Frayling, who is sceptical about the curse, suffered a series of bizarre events which he finds difficult to explain away.
When we were filming The Face of Tutankhamun in spring '92, one or two things happened while we were filming that were quite strange. Well, I was standing over the sarcophagus in the tomb and talking all about the curse, actually. And just as I started talking, all the lights went out. The famous International Hotel in Cairo. I got into the lift on the 26th floor with the producer, and there was a loud crack, followed by swish, 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 and we started shooting down the lift shaft. And some sort of braking system was pushing outwards, and eventually it got stuck, lodged in the shaft, just below the lower basement. And I realized at that moment we had fallen down the lift shaft. I didn't look up to see if King Tut was there with a hacksaw, and I threw up, actually, all over the car. I suddenly realized, Christ, I've nearly died.
Peter Graham Scott was the producer of The Curse of King Tutankhamun's Tomb, a film which was supposed to star Ian McShane and was made in 1979 and 80 as part of a lavish co-production to be shown in America.
When we started filming, we had some very simple shots to do of Ian McShane as Carter. We were going to do a shot where he drives up. He was pressing the accelerator instead of the brake. It shot him over the cliff. The car hit the ground and he trapped his leg and it broke pretty badly. But then we had the terrible problem of who is going to play the lead, because Ian was going to be out of action for 4 months. It might well have been something connected with the fact you should not disturb the dead.
Here at St Mark's Graveyard in the Oxfordshire village of Blackburton are buried 2 members from 99 Squadron based at RAF Brize Norton. It was their job to fly Tutankhamun's treasures to an exhibition at the British Museum in London.
In January 1972, I was the loadmaster on a flight from Brize Norton to Cairo to collect the relics of Tutankhamun.
I was the senior technical officer of the trip. The captain held a secret envelope and was told to open it up at a certain time over the Mediterranean.
Pick up Tutankhamun artifacts, as detailed below from Cairo Airport. Maintain absolute security at all times.
I was the co-pilot. My memory of the load was a pile of tea chests sitting on the ground outside the aircraft with one solitary Egyptian soldier sitting on top of them with a .303 rifle and a cigarette in his mouth. Didn't seem all that important.
The value of the cargo we had on board this time was certainly the greatest that I've ever had on board. At 150 to 200 million pounds, you'd have to go a long way to beat it.
There was a few cryptic remarks, of course, about the curse, which was bound to happen, but nobody really kind of took any serious.
The relics on board included Tutankhamun's 22-carat gold death mask and his coffin.
4 or 5 of us were playing cards, and the reason we played cards, because we were totally bored. That was all it was. And we lost the fact that we were sat on the gold mask. That had no longer any relevance anymore. It was a box for us to playing cards on. We all stood up, had enough, and that's when I stood up and kicked the box and said a stupid childish remark.
I've just kicked the most expensive thing in the world.
I do remember kicking the box with my left foot. And, of course, a couple of years later, I fell to the ground. Cursed myself for doing it, and I happened to look down to pick myself up, and I noticed that my left foot was turned round facing me. The next day I found out that I had in actual fact broken 37 bones.
It was the same leg with which Ian had kicked the crate containing the death mask.
But the RAF medical people have surveyed me again, and I've got an 80% disability due to the injury alone. The future isn't exactly rosy for me, but at least I'm still around.
Crew member Jim Webb's house was destroyed by fire, and Captain Rick Laurie died a year later. Also on board was Ian Lansdowne's best pal in the RAF, flight engineer Ken Parkinson.
Ken was a very good friend of mine, and he died Friday the 13th of August 1978. Ken and myself were probably the closest friend I've ever had in my life. He was quite a fit man. He played rugby for the Air Force. Ken and Rick were in their early 40s, so naturally we were all surprised to hear two comparatively healthy people, both play sport very heavily, die so early. I think people begin to realize there is a possibility that there could be a curse, purely because of the number of people who've been involved in it.
Archaeologists are still searching for other tombs in the Egyptian valleys. Bearing in mind the experiences of those who've come into contact with Tutankhamun's tomb, perhaps it would be wiser to leave the pharaoh's rest undisturbed.
Just for the record, shortly after we began production on this particular program, our researcher was struck down by a sudden and inexplicable illness. It was the first time he'd had to see a doctor in 20 years. All he needed was to take a few pills and keep away from ancient tombs. I think I'll go home now. Good night. Good evening. Each year, NASA pours a staggering $22 billion into space exploration. It seems that putting a man on the moon and sending probes to the far reaches of the solar system have only served to fuel man's desire for knowledge of outer space. But while we look to the skies, there is a great unknown much closer to home, and that's inner space. The workings of the human brain are in many respects a mystery to us, and the world of dreams is no exception.
We all dream, but some of us dream lucidly. Scientists claim to have established that while remaining asleep, we can become aware that we're dreaming and then start to control the course of our dream, as if directing a film.
I was on holiday in Portugal when I dreamt that a friend of mine contacted me to say he had to go to a funeral. He was very upset. The funeral was in London. Could I go with him? And the next thing I knew, I was in a big funeral limousine following the hearse with him, and he was very upset, and we were in terrible traffic. He thought we were going to be late getting to the crematorium, so I said, "Don't worry, we'll fly." And with that, the car took off into the clouds and soared over London. It was absolutely wonderful. All the sensations were very vivid. The colours were brilliant. I could see everything, I could feel everything, and I had this enormous sense of power. So when we arrived at the crematorium, there was a crowd of mourners there. I was able to turn the whole event into a party.
With this dream, Diana Clift joined those people whose lives have been changed by the mysterious powers of lucid dreaming.
At first, it was an ordinary, vivid dream. I was walking along a beach, and everything was wonderful. And then I saw some coins, and I knelt down to dig them out, basically. They seemed to grow, and it occurred to me, the only explanation here is that this is a dream. I decided to conjure up a dream partner. So I saw a stack of deck chairs, and I thought, well, behind the deck chairs will be this person. And first, there was no one there. I looked up, and as I did so, a girl was walking towards me. And she was short, with dark hair, rather curvaceous, in a bikini. She came up to me and said,
"Hello, my name's Jane."
And we embraced and had quite a nice dream together.
Dr. Keith Hearn had this dream over 20 years ago. He became so interested in lucid dreams that he started to study them.
We still don't know why we dream. It's just a mystery. We dream for about 2 hours every night, which tots up to 6 years or so in the course of a lifetime. And REM, or rapid eye movement, dreaming sleep, occurs every 90 minutes or so in the sleep period. When I started my research, it was thought that you'd go mad if you didn't dream. But studies have shown that there are certain drugs, antidepressants for instance, which completely knock out REM sleep, and yet people show no harmful effects. I wanted to prove that lucid dreams were genuine dreams. The problem was that in REM sleep, the body is actually paralyzed, except for the eyes. So I had the notion that I could get subjects to signal by moving their eyes left to right several times. I also had a method of inducing lucidity by giving electronic pinpricks to subjects at a level which would not waken them, but would be incorporated into the dream, and so establish lucidity.
Among the subjects of Hearn's experiments to prove the existence of lucid dreams was Pam Green. She can still remember the lucid dream which led to a scientific breakthrough.
I was roller skating downhill, which is quite a scary experience for me because I don't roller skate. I was aware that the ground was disappearing beneath me very quickly. I had a wall on one side of me and a roadway on the other. So I had to be very careful that if I veered off a straight course that I would either crash into the wall or run into the road. I felt the pinprick. This was the signal for me to look left and right and signal to Keith. For some reason, I felt I had to close my eyes to do this. This worried me slightly because it meant that I may crash into the wall or run into the road. However, I risked it and found afterwards that I was okay. I was now aware, because I was dreaming, that it was perfectly safe to do what I wanted to do.
It was an incredible experience when I first saw the signals from a person who was in a lucid dream. Suddenly, a sequence of left-right eye movement signals came through. It was like getting signals from another universe. It was amazing.
Hearn's next quest was to discover how the powers of this mysterious world could be used. It's long been known that dreams offer a source of creativity. One of the many artists inspired by dreams was the 18th century Italian composer Giuseppe Tartini. After dreaming that the devil played a violin to him, Tartini woke and wrote the music now known as the Devil's Trill Sonata. Hearn himself has tapped this reservoir of creativity.
In this dream, I was walking along a riverbank with my girlfriend at that time. Now, in reality, the relationship was breaking down, and I was feeling very upset about this because I really loved this woman. And the dream seemed to reflect the sadness, and at that time, I heard some music. It was a flute tune, very plaintive. Anyway, on waking, I wrote down the music and developed it and called it Walk to the Pagoda, and it's since been recorded.
Hearn believes that anyone can harness the powers that lucid dreams offer.
Lucid dreams are an amazing phenomenon, and they can be available to anyone. I think they constitute the ultimate therapy. They can make us feel good, they can banish phobias, fears, and through lucid dreams, we can heal ourselves. One such example is where people have chronic nightmares. You can actually change nightmares to pleasant lucid dreams, and the trick is to change your mindset from thinking, oh my God, here's the nightmare, to great, wonderful, here's the nightmare. That means I'm dreaming. and I can control my dream.
But some professional dream therapists believe that if we try to change the natural course of dreams, we're avoiding important messages that they can give us.
I do believe that dreams have a functional meaning. I think there's a reason for us to dream. And I believe that the unconscious gives us another perspective on things. And that is part of the point of the dream. When we're stuck in a situation, sometimes a dream will illuminate the situation in a completely different way. My concern about lucid dreaming would be that it seems that it might be actually interfering with the dream as a communication from the unconscious, a letter from the unconscious, as somebody once described it.
Michael Edwards has other reservations about the way lucid dreams can be used. Carlo Rossi is a personal trainer. 2 years ago, his father died. Shortly after, Carlo had an ordinary, non-lucid dream about him.
We were hugging each other, and I went to look at his face, but I couldn't quite see his face clearly.
Carlo is now determined to try to use lucid dreaming as a way of re-establishing contact with his father, to see him again fully.
Grieving is a necessary process and usually, inevitably, a painful process. It would concern me if lucid dreaming was seen as a kind of panacea, a way of avoiding that, a way of opting out of it, a way of escaping the pain of it, and therefore never grieving properly as a deep emotional experience that we have to go through. It's too facile, it's too easy, I think, just to say, well, it's so good I can call up my father again.
For those people who want to induce lucid dreaming, a whole technology has sprung up. It's claimed that the Nova Dreamer, for instance, can alert you when you're dreaming.
It consists of a soft sleep mask that you put over your closed eyes and you go to bed. When you're dreaming, your eyes move rapidly from side to side. The sensors in the mask spot the eye movements and realise that you're dreaming. Then it waits a little and it flashes a red light.
These machines that are on the market at the moment, which claim to be able to induce lucid dreaming and give you these wonderful nights of entertainment, I think are an awful idea. I find it very unhealthy, this notion that instead of just having dreams, we have to view them as some sort of entertainment, some sort of commodity.
I think some people might consider the Nova Dreamer to be a toy, but we've had some so amazing stories we know it's more than that. For example, once we had a guy who was chair-bound. He was physically disabled. With the Dreamer, he was able to walk around the countryside and fly above it, and he went from being depressed when I first spoke to him to somebody feeling full of life and revitalised.
I think that in the next century, a lot of people will have their own dream machines and be able to conjure up virtually any situation they want at night in their dreams for recreational purposes. But I also think that technology is going to advance so much that we'll be able to see what people are dreaming by monitoring the visual cortex, so that we'll be able to actually watch this on a television set.
Presumably we're going to have to pay somebody for the privilege of seeing our own dreams. And I think it's a pity that we're now starting to see our own mental processes in these terms as just another form of entertainment.
Keith Home believes we may only have to wait about 15 years before it's possible to record and play back our dreams, just like TV programmes, I suppose. We might even pop down to the video store and rent someone else's for the weekend. A bit like examining another person's laundry. You might have noticed that children have a unique and very direct way of looking at things. Their minds are free from the worldly clutter which preoccupies adults. Could this mean that children are more receptive to unworldly phenomena? Some observers believe that they can possess exceptional psychic powers.
Former teacher and psychologist Cassandra Eason's interest in psychic children was triggered by an incident involving her husband John and her young son Jack. The story begins one Sunday morning in 1988.
I'd been up most of the night with a teething baby. We were having breakfast and I was desperately waiting for my husband John to come home from his overnight shift.
Journalist John was doing his usual morning motorbike journey from his London offices to his Reading home, over 40 miles away.
look at the mess.
We looked at the clock and I thought he'll be home any moment now. Jack looked up from his cornflakes and said,
Mummy, Daddy's gone rolly boys on his bike, but he's okay.
Eat your breakfast, Jack. God, where is your father?
I was driving home when all of a sudden I just hit this patch of oil. I was trying to slow down and skidded on it and came off it. The bike wasn't too badly damaged. I wasn't too badly damaged either. I just picked myself up and kept driving home.
Sometime after 11, the sound of John's motorbike was outside. I rushed out.
I know what happened. Jack told me.
Just a few cuts and bruises, I'm okay.
Jack told me.
Of course, at that moment, it all fell into place.
I was fairly stunned. I couldn't explain it at the time.
It had turned out that about the time Jack had said what he'd said, John was actually falling off his motorbike.
I tried to work out some sort of logical explanation. It might have been that he was expecting me to have an accident because I had a motorbike and he'd heard about people having motorbike accidents. But I couldn't explain the coincidence of the time that he said it was about the time that I was falling off the bike.
The episode intrigued Cassandra, who began researching children's psychic abilities.
I've come across thousands, not just hundreds, but thousands and thousands of experiences involving children.
Since the incident involving her son, Cassandra has found enough material to write several books on the paranormal, detailing the claims of psychic powers in children.
All children seem to have a latent psychic ability, but it's something that people find frightening because it's not something you can take into a laboratory and weigh or measure.
So what is the scientist's view? David Marks is a professor of psychology at Middlesex University.
It wouldn't surprise me if we found more psychic reports from children than from adults, but I would suggest that this is bound up with their very fantasy-prone personalities.
Fantasy, perhaps. But that can't explain what happened to 7-year-old Erin Solomon, who seems to have premonitions about her family's cats.
Erin woke up one morning and she'd had a dream about Zack, our cat. She dreamt that he was killed. He was killed in her dream.
There was this girl and she kicked Zack into the river and then someone found his body in the river and then I woke up and I thought Zack was dead. I ran into my mum's room and I told my mum about my dream and she says he isn't dead, he's still alive, it's all right, it was only a dream.
Then a few days after that, we realised Zack was missing. He didn't come in for his usual feed and things. So I contacted the vet and they said that they had found a cat that fitted Zack's description. When I realised the dream had come true about Zack, we remembered that she'd had other dreams about previous 2 cats that we had.
I had a dream about my cat Rance. Had a dream about my mum had a party and they dropped a penny on the floor and my nanny told Jasmine to pick up the penny and before Ramp swallowed it and she swallowed it and it got stuck in her throat and she died.
Within a few days of Erin's dream, Ramps died. Erin also dreamt that a 3rd cat they had, called Gandhi, died. Within 2 days, he too had passed away.
When we realised that she was having these dreams and the cats were then dying within a short period of time after the dreams, we did realise that this was quite strange.
Many parents will be familiar with their young child having an imaginary friend whom only they can see and communicate with. Some children claim they're talking to a dead relative, perhaps someone they've never even met. 13-year-old Nicholas Mason from Wolverhampton believes he's contacted regularly by his dead granddad.
My father was an amazing character. He was very, very well loved by everybody, and I can close my eyes now and I can see his face clearly. When I told my father that I was pregnant, he was thrilled to bits. And when it was a boy, he was the very first grandchild in the family. He wouldn't put him down. They were very, very close. And after my father died, Nick, to say that he was only 3.5 when my dad died, he missed him terribly.
He really cared for me. He took me everywhere, took me to the park, out, shopping, got me nice stuff.
After his death, Nicholas felt his granddad still talked to him. His mother didn't think too much of it. It seemed a comfort to Nicholas. But then when the family car, once owned by Nicholas's granddad, was stolen, something happened that no one could explain.
It got to about mid-afternoon and Nicholas was playing with his friends on the green and he suddenly came up to me and he said,
Mum, I know where the car is.
What do you mean you know where the car is?
Granddad told me.
Now, I always believe in listening to a child. So I said, all right then, where's the car? And with that, he goes off into the corner of the garden and I can see him nodding his head and shaking his head and listening and thinking. And then he came back and he says, Grandad says you know where the car is, Mum.
Granddad said he was next to these 2 bridges.
What do you mean 2 bridges?
2 bridges that you could go over and under.
Do you mean Bridge North?
No, not Bridge North. It's where we used to have picnics.
24 hours later, police found the stolen car abandoned by the thieves 7 miles away. Roseanne was asked to pick it up.
Mum, there's a car and there's 2 bridges. Just like Grandad said.
When we found the car in the exact place that Nick had described, I was absolutely thrilled to bits. To me, it was proof what Nick had told me had actually happened.
The car was parked next to 2 bridges, near a picnic spot, just as Nicholas said his granddad had told him.
If he'd have said something like that after the car was found, Grandad told me it was going to be found in that place, then yes, there'd have been a lot of doubt. But he told me before the car was found.
So how do scientists explain claims that children can talk to dead relatives who give them information they couldn't possibly know? Coincidence is one explanation.
I think to a scientist we can explain it in terms of the children's imagination, which is extremely vivid.
But is there a darker side to some children's apparent psychic abilities? Could it in fact be harmful? The Church believes it can. The Reverend Tom Willis is a Church of England exorcist. He is called in, usually by distraught parents, to exorcise demons they believe are possessing their child.
Exorcism is part of the Church's healing ministry, which has been revived a lot in recent years.
Reported cases of children being possessed by spirits have risen steadily since the abolition of the Witchcraft Act in 1952, a repeal which decriminalised practising the occult.
Since then, a lot more people have dabbled in our generation in the occult, in seances and Ouija boards and astrology and tarot cards. And the Church has to mop up the results of all this. There has been an increase in the number of people asking for this ministry, and the number of children involved has also increased.
Reverend Willis has exorcised many children who he believes were possessed by evil spirits.
Well, I recently had a case of a young child of 3 who was swearing and blaspheming, and they knew the child couldn't have learnt this and said, "Who's telling you all this?" And she said, "The old man that comes into my room, he says these words." And eventually when we prayed for the repose of the soul of this chap and blessed the house, they moved house and they say now there's no more problems.
Are these genuine cases of spirits possessing children with psychic abilities, or is there a more mundane explanation?
Children can believe sometimes that they're possessed, so can adults, but in children it's very, very vivid. There are much more rational explanations. For example, a child has a dream that they are being possessed by some sort of spirit. They wake up the next morning, they're very frightened by this, they tell their parents, and the parents panic and contact the local priest. The priest comes along, he may himself believe in spirits, he then reinforces the belief in the child, and they go through an exorcism. But really here what we've got is a medieval story, a medieval fairy tale to explain and interpret complicated experiences.
Well, whether or not kids are psychic, one thing's for sure. They do have special powers to wrap you around the little fingers. Good night. Good evening. Before the dawn of recorded time, scientists believe, there existed a land bridge between the North American continent and Asia, where the Bering Sea now flows. It's across this land that Native Americans are thought to have migrated from the east. During their trek, did those early settlers intrude on the territory of a mystical creature which still inhabits thousands of square miles of forest from northern California to Canada? This beast crops up again and again in Native American mythology and has many names. Buckwass, Oma, and Sasquatch are just a few. But you and I know it as Bigfoot.
Impenetrable woodland covers vast areas of the Pacific Northwest. Sparsely populated and largely unexplored, the region is believed by many to be the habitat of the mysterious and elusive Bigfoot, for whom the forests provide the perfect sanctuary.
It's just fascinating to think that a large bipedal hominid, hair-covered ape of some sort is wandering around in these woods around us. There certainly is enough resources to support something like that.
Todd Neese is a computer manager from Portland in Oregon and a sergeant in America's National Guard. During a training exercise in the forests, Todd had just detonated some explosives when he says he noticed movement near the blast site.
There, standing in the middle, were these three figures, very dark, almost jet black in color, standing on two legs, arms to their side, quite like a human would.
It's accounts like this which maintain the interest and curiosity of Bigfoot fans like Larry Lund.
Since I was a kid, I've always been in wonderment of things that I can't prove are there, that I haven't seen. I'm an investigator. I go out to sites where there's been sightings of the creature or tracks. A lot of it, of course, is hoaxing, and you can tell, but we do get a lot of information.
The legend of Bigfoot is so compelling that over the years, it's generated a minor industry. It's also encouraged hoaxers to make outrageous claims and falsify evidence.
Here's an example of a lot of the fakes we get. As you can see, it doesn't have a real definite foot shape. And the toes are just straight across out to here and then real wide and bulbous. Now there's one toe there, and this one appears to be missing the little toe coming up.
And the hoaxers don't stop at Bigfoot's little toes.
I want you to listen to this. This is a tape that has been sent. It's supposed to be the sound of a Bigfoot. And this is what people say they're hearing.
This is not the sound of a Bigfoot. It's a fake, recorded in a church bell tower. But there's one piece of evidence that even Larry finds persuasive. In 1967, a Bigfoot enthusiast called Roger Patterson shot this remarkable piece of film in Bluff Creek, California.
It shows this creature walking away from Roger Patterson as he filmed. He runs behind it.
Patterson claims he'd filmed a female Bigfoot.
As she turned, you can really see that it is a female creature then, because she has large pendulous breasts. And as she disappears, you can still see the movement of the skin. You can see the muscle tone. I'm convinced this is a real creature.
The following day, Patterson returned to Bluff Creek and took what he claims were casts of footprints made by the Bigfoot.
A somewhat normal-looking human-type foot. Toes are displayed just about right, nice angle, a nice flat heel here with no outrageous lines in it. So, since we do have the film and these were cast by people the next day, we believe these are real.
The Patterson film has always aroused controversy. Its supporters point to the fact that in 30 years, nobody has confessed to a hoax. They also claim that no one at the time would have had the skills to fake it.
Several of the movie people and their special effects have looked at this film. They said, Larry, if back then, 1967, not possible.
1,000 miles to the north lies Vancouver Island in British Columbia. It's surrounded by numerous smaller islands where dense forest extends to the shoreline. For centuries, these islands have been home to Native Americans. Village Island, now long since abandoned, was the birthplace of Tom Seaweed. For him and his tribe, the legend of Bigfoot, or Bukwus as they call the creature, is part of folklore.
My people of Quagioth have always believed in a being that inhabits this area. Now, the Bukwus is said to be a large, hair-covered giant that you can see on the beaches when you're out clam digging on low tide. And many of our legends and dances are about the Bukwus.
4 years ago, Tom and a friend took a boat trip around the deserted islands off the Vancouver coast.
Just as it got dark, I started calling for wolves to see if I'd get an answer from them. To my surprise, I got a call from the beach, but it wasn't wolves. It was a whistling, whooping sort of noise. Whoop, whoop, whoop. And at the same time, a really bad smell came drifting towards my boat. We saw something move, a shadow come out of the bush. And right there, the first thing I noticed was this great creature, like a human covered in hair, just boom. I was amazed because he'd done the same posturing that I'd been taught when I used to dance the Bukwus for my grandfather.
Tom says he and his friend watched in amazement until the creature finally strode off down the beach.
Bukwus I knew about as a creature that ate cockles and clams on the beaches, was shy of humans. You know, I've grown up with the legends. I guess I had my doubts, but after that night, no doubts.
Did Tom really see a Bigfoot that night? Skeptics believe there is a simple explanation. The witnesses have been confusing Bukwus, or Sasquatch, with wild bears, common to the region. This theory is rejected by wildlife biologist Dr. John Bindernagel, who has studied hundreds of sightings.
Sasquatch differs from a bear actually in several ways, although superficially there's a similarity. If we look at a Sasquatch, just the outline, it has a much shorter neck, long legs, and in profile, a very flat face. A bear, by comparison, has a very prominent snout, has very sloping or tapered shoulders, and has very short legs. And so, again, although there is this superficial similarity, it doesn't bear any serious analysis.
One day in July 1985, the Bradshaw family from Washington State went on a camping trip deep into the woods.
We had heard that there was a sighting of Sasquatch in the North River area and decided that we were going to go out and check it out.
Yeah, we hunting as well as fishing here?
You can't be too careful. It was a beautiful day down there, but yet there was an eeriness to it. It was just something that wasn't quite right.
Fred and his son Rick went off to the river to fish, leaving Carol behind at the campsite.
There was this total stillness. And the stillness does make you wonder, because you have a feeling when you're in the woods that there is something watching.
At dusk, Fred and Rick returned to the campsite to join Carol for dinner.
I decided, well, we'd get some sleep. Don't stay up too late, Rick. We want to get and then we'd get up later in the night, and then we'd go look around at night, because these creatures seem to roam more at night.
What the heck was that?
All of a sudden, there was just this big, loud, like a big limb had fallen.
Sounded like a tree came down in the middle of the camp.
I don't know, maybe it's just a bear or cougar or something.
Over there.
A weird feeling hit me, kind of the back of the spine over the top of the head. And I said, Dad, do you see what I see?
Here was this form that was standing behind a tree.
The Bradshaws claim this was no fleeting glimpse and the creature was in their sight for several minutes before it disappeared. They're insistent it was a Bigfoot.
I saw what I saw, and I can't prove it to anyone else. You just have to have an open mind about it.